Hello and welcome back. I am broadcasting from home. Um, my husband happens to be out of town, so our family friend Peppa Pig is watching the kids. So if I have to run off quickly, it means that something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. Okay, so let's continue with Chapter 8, Data Analysis and Results, examining what was found in a quantitative study. And we were starting with the results part. So let me scroll down to there. Not that one. Not that one. Here we are. Results. Where do you find the results about the participants' characteristics? Often these are called the descriptive results. They may be found in the methods section or the results section. Sometimes in the methods section, they're in the sample part. And sometimes in the results section, they're at the very first thing that the researcher will tell you about. They typically describe the relevant demographic characteristics of the study sample, such as age, ethnicity or race, educational background, family status, health status, etc., depending on what the study was about. So, for example, in my study that was published in the Journal of Teacher Education, that's why I put this little picture up here, and I report demographic background, whether or not the teachers were above 27 years old, what their gender was, and just broad racial categories for my sample. And I also break down, the percent of teachers who reflected that background by whether they were alternatively certified or traditionally certified. So you see that in terms of above 27 years old, and I was basically going about 5 years after college, right? Traditional college age is graduation is 22, 5 years later is 27. So we see that 58% or almost 60% of alternatively certified teachers were in this older category, and only about 42% of traditionally certified teachers were in this older category. Okay, so that's participant characteristics. Oh, and by the way, you see I have an F statistic here and listing things related to the F statistic. Not important for understanding the gist of the study. Okay? All right. Where do you find results about the instrument's performance? This may be found in the method or results section also. It typically describes the performance of instruments with the study's participants. And in survey studies, you may or may not have an instrument. In a lot of psychology-related studies, you do have an instrument that's used. And by instrument, we mean some kind of mental health scale, some kind of scale that was used to measure something that is maybe a little bit hard to get at, that you need to use a particular scale for, or index, or what they are sometimes called. In fact, in this study, you'll recall that in the methods section, when I talk about feelings of preparedness, right? So the feelings are always kind of nebulous. I created an index by compositing, in this case, averaging scores from 5 questions. And here I talk about, in this section of the methods part, I talk about a little bit about the scale. To perform the composite, I averaged teacher responses across items, and I write a Cronbach's alpha of 0.84 indicated that the scale was reliable. Okay, and you'll see that term, Cronbach's alpha, referred to when folks are talking about whether they think their scale was any good. All right. But again, it's a statistic, it's a detail that we don't really need to worry about too much. Okay, let's go back. It's one of those things that if it's low, the researcher should say, one of the limitations of this study was that it had low internal consistency, therefore, blah, 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 blah. Or, but if it's high, people usually don't mention it beyond if it's above 0.7, if the Cronbach's alpha is above 0.7, people usually don't mention it beyond where they just report the results of the test of internal consistency. Okay, yeah, so I told you the internal consistency, the Cronbach's alpha, and identification of subscales. Now, certain instruments may have certain sub-items, right? Let's see. What would be an example? Let's say intelligence might be broken down into verbal ability, mathematical ability, problem solving, right? So it might have 3 subscales. And you find out about that usually in the method section when they're talking about the instrument. I just heard a cry. I think it was my daughter pretending that her baby was crying. Okay, so we're going to continue. Okay, so that, yeah, there, I put in a box there what I was talking about before. Where do you find results in response to the study's research question and hypothesis? And this is what we're all waiting for, right? We want to know, what did they find out in terms of their research question? And this may be found in the results section of the report, and hopefully it will be. And sometimes that section is called results and discussion. And typically they address the study's main descriptive, comparison, and relationship research questions and hypotheses one by one. And the studies that are really clearly written will say, answer to research question 1, answer to research question 2, answer to research question 3. So now the results should match the study's research design. In the past, certain designs were tended to have graphs and other designs tended to have tables. Nowadays, basically, you can have tables and graphs for any kind of design. But the written paragraphs, the text that accompanies each result, will emphasize different things. So for a true experiment or quasi-experiment, remember that was the rats, right? And the 1 + 1 = 2, the math example. The results paragraphs would emphasize inferential statistics that compare groups in terms of the dependent variables. Okay, so we're comparing groups. And we'd have tables and graphs that compare groups. In the single subject experiment, that was that reading example. And this would be descriptive statistics that describe the data over time. Okay, and remember there was that graph that showed, here's how the student performed before the intervention, and then here's how they performed after the intervention. For a causal comparative study, we would expect inferential statistics that compare groups in terms of the dependent variables. And even though I used a survey design, that was my main design type for the study that we're using as an example, it was also causal comparative in that I made some inferences about the teachers, in addition to reporting what I found about the sample and how that relates to the population. And so I'll show you a little bit later on more about that. A correlational design, we would be looking for inferential statistics that test relationships among variables. And we'd see tables and we'd see graphs that show the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. Or there may be even multiple independent variables. Okay, or among dependent variables. Some correlational designs, there really isn't a clear independent and dependent. It's like they're all dependent and they're all relating to one another. Okay, for survey design, usually it's focused on descriptive statistics that describe trends and variability for single variables. There may be relationship and comparison analysis, as there was with my study. One of the things about survey designs is this is where you tend to see infographics, because basically they're looking at one population and seeing what's going on in that one population. Okay. Next slide. So, understanding the results of in a quantitative study, and this like the main results. Here's what I do. Okay, first examining the tables, and depending on how familiar I am with the study design and the study content, I spend either more or less time on the tables. If it's something that's new to you, if you really, you're not sure how to read the tables, hopefully they have graphs as well. Okay, so you want to get the gist out of the tables, but hopefully there'll be some graphs that can really communicate what happened in their study. Examine figures that portray variables. Figures is another term for graphs or charts, and that portray variables and their relationships. And read the detailed explanations written about the statistical results. Now, reading the explanations is very important because the researcher hopefully is interpreting for us what the table said, what the graphs said. Okay. So the tables, we're going to be seeing a summary of quantitative information organized into rows and columns. Reading the title first is important, but sometimes the title is not informative. Table 1, not informative. Okay. Looking at the labels for each column and each row to identify specific variables in computed statistics. Usually you see independent variables along the rows and the dependent variables in the columns. Not always, but usually. Identifying the primary statistics that were included may or may not be important, whether they use the F statistic or a T statistic or what. But I'll show you what really is important. Tables may include it might be demographic tables, it might be tables that compare groups, or it might be tables that relate to the variables. Okay, so here is one of my results tables, and I know this is really small on the video, so if you can't see because you're looking at this on a small screen, please look at the PowerPoint directly, and you'll be able to see this more clearly. Okay, so here I have the variables, and then what is labeled parameter estimates. Now, the first thing, of course, is to read the title. Fitted Tobit regression model. Dr. Campoli did some kind of statistic, okay, regression, right? She did some kind of statistical analysis. Describing the extent to which first-year teachers feel well prepared. Okay, she's looking at first-year teachers and if they feel well prepared. As a function of the features, types of coursework and length of practice teaching, and practice teaching is often known as student teaching, their preparation programs, and then some stuff in parentheses. When you're reading reports and you're trying to get the gist of what happened, basically you can let your eyes skip over anything that was in parentheses. Because if it was really important, it would not be in parentheses. Okay, so here's the variables. So first we're looking at the effects of coursework. Methods coursework. This would be how to teach science or how to teach math or whatever the subject is. And we see there's a number under parameter estimates, there's a number under SE, there's a number under effect size. Notice that this first row of numbers has like these asterisks next to it. The asterisks in quantitative research tend to be very important because usually they mean a certain thing. Usually they mean that the difference found in the sample, the researcher believes that that would be the same difference we would also find a difference in the population. Okay, so I found, as you see, there's some asterisks by methods, by the number associated with the methods. I found that methods coursework mattered for feelings of preparedness. I also found that theory or psychology courses mattered. There's an asterisk there too for feelings of preparedness. Courses on adapting curriculum, there's a little tilde for my study that meant they may have mattered for feelings of preparedness. Okay. Now, next is effects on the length of practice teaching. No practice was the reference. So that was kind of like my baseline. 1 to 7 weeks of practice teaching, no asterisk. Not that different from no practice in terms, or the reference in terms of feelings of preparedness. 8 to 11 weeks, there's that little tilde. So may make a difference in the population, maybe not as sure. 12 weeks or more, asterisk. Having 12 weeks or more is of student teaching or practice teaching is very different than having no practice in terms of teachers' feelings of preparedness. Okay, so now you get the gist of what I found out in my study. And then I also included some figures, and hopefully a lot of your papers will include figures, because often they're a summary of quantitative information that can be a lot clearer than the tables. And it can be a chart, a graph, a pictorial type thing that visually shows the relationship among scores or variables in the study. You want to read the caption, typically found at the bottom, that describes the contents of the figure. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes not. Again, figure 2, not that helpful. Read the labels to determine which specific variables are displayed in the figure, and that's pretty important. And look at the legend and notes for additional information. Okay. So now, this is a bar graph, but it's tilted sideways, right? It's tilted sideways. Now, if it were upright, this would be the x-axis and this would be the y-axis, right? I think I did this just because it was easier to read with it like tilted sideways. And we're going from the bottom of the bar is the usually what's at the bottom of the bar. It's on the side here is the independent variable, and we're going up to see what the relationship is with the dependent variable. So we're looking at how the length of practice teaching in this figure relates to the percent of teachers who felt well prepared. Okay, so here's figure 4, and I tried to write a useful title: percentage of first-year alternatively certified teachers predicted to feel well prepared given participation in programs with various lengths of practice teaching. And I use that word predicted just because this is based on a statistical test. All right. So we know these are only first year alternatively certified teachers. Okay. And we're looking at how the percent of them given a group, let's say given a group of 100, how many of those folks would feel well prepared. Okay. So, programs offering no practice, only 6 out of 100 would feel well prepared. Programs offering 8 to 11 weeks of practice, we got 62 out of 100, or 62% would feel well prepared. And best of all, programs offering 12 or more weeks of practice, 71% of teachers would feel well prepared. By the way, Augusta University offers excellent student teaching lengths to their prospective teachers, and they have, I believe it's a year of practicum or more of time in classrooms. Okay, so you see that there's a big difference, right? The graph shows clearly there's a big difference in terms of how well prepared teachers feel when they have no or very little practice compared to where they have more substantial practice. Okay. So then reading the detailed explanations. Identifying what statistic was calculated and perhaps the research reasons for selecting that statistic, not that important. Noting whether the hypothesis test produced a significant or non-significant result. Very important. If the result was significant, looking for a report of the practical significance in terms of an effect size. Okay, so what's this with significant and non-significant? Okay, first of all, in the papers, it should say statistically significant and statistically non-significant. And what it means, it relates to whether the hypothesis was rejected, the null hypothesis was rejected, or the researcher failed to reject the null hypothesis. So we have this idea, right, of the bell curve. And this bell curve, depending on where the statistic came out, the bell curve, and where that falls on the bell curve, that's going to help us know whether we would expect the difference in our sample that we found to relate to the difference in some population that we're really interested in. Okay? So let's look at an example. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, this example doesn't talk about statistically significant. Okay, so normally you would, in the results you'd see, yeah, because I was talking about the illustration here. Normally in the results you'd see that, you know, let's see, let me talk about for methods coursework, the parameter estimate, I might write, this is what I probably wrote, something like this. The parameter estimate was 0.17 and P less than 0.01, right? That P less than 0.01 might be in parentheses, right? This result was statistically significant. It showed that methods teachers who, or prospective teachers who received methods coursework, when they became teachers in their first year, they felt more well prepared than teachers who did not receive methods coursework, or teachers who receive methods coursework feel more well prepared than teachers who do not receive methods coursework. And the reason I changed my language a little bit is that the fact that this is statistically significant means that I should be able to generalize to the larger population, okay, teachers in general, not just the teachers in my study, but teachers, first year, alternatively certified teachers in general. Okay, and in terms of, let's go to the effects of the length of practice teaching. I found that the parameter associated with 12 weeks or more of practice teaching was 0.216, open paren, P less than 0.05, close paren. This shows that teachers who received 12 weeks or more of student teaching or practice teaching felt better prepared than teachers who did not. Okay. Uh-oh. Baby's starting to fuss. So let me move this along. Okay, so if the result is statistically significant, I can draw conclusions that there was a difference. If the result was not statistically significant, I cannot draw that conclusion that there would be a difference in the population. Okay, so then here's just the references from this section. But just to wrap up, yeah, as you're reading the detailed explanation of the results, it should kind of illuminate what is in the tables or the figures. Okay, so for example, okay, yeah. So let's look at this here. So we saw that graph, right? In the text, I write that a larger proportion of alternatively certified teachers, about 32%, receive 12 or more weeks of practice. And this is would be alternatively certified teachers whose first year of teaching was considered practice and they were getting feedback during their first year of teaching. Among first-year alternatively certified teachers who are enrolled in a program that offer a field experience that is at least 12 weeks long, almost 3/4 or 71% feel well prepared. So that gives you just additional information that illuminates what we saw on the graph. Okay, and that's why we're reading the detailed explanations. Okay, because often we can get the gist by looking at the tables and by looking at the graphs, but actually reading the text, if it's well written, it should illuminate things for us, point out things that are really important for the study. Okay, I hope this was helpful for you as you are reading quantitative studies, and I look forward to talking with you next time. Bye-bye.